Police cars have been set on fire and shops have been looted in a sixth night of unrest across the United States. Curfews are in force in nearly 40 cities, including the capital, Washington, D.C., as protests continue over the death of a black man in police custody. Our North America correspondent, David Willis, has this report.
This country is walking a fine and dangerous line. As a large and angry crowd gathered outside the White House, it emerged that at one point, at the height of the protests here on Friday, President Trump was ushered into an underground bunker by members of the Secret Service in the interests of his own safety.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
On several occasions in the last few days, demonstrators here have attempted to scale the walls. And many were reluctant to conform with a newly imposed overnight curfew. As the president hunkered down, his presumptive Democratic presidential opponent tweeted a picture of himself at the scene of one of last night's protests. Joe Biden promised to listen to the demonstrators and help shape the movement for reform. Many protests have been peaceful, and in Minneapolis, where all this began a week ago, there was a moment when protesters and a National Guard officer came together.
Shaking a hand.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Elbow! Use this as a talking stick.
Elbow!
Use a talking stick.
Nonetheless, George Floyd's arrest on a Minneapolis street corner and his frantic pleas for help have given rise to one of the most turbulent periods in recent American history. The white police officer pictured holding his knee to Mr. Floyd's neck is due to appear in court later today. Derek Chauvin is facing charges of murder and manslaughter, but 3 other officers involved in Mr. Floyd's arrest are still at large, and there are growing calls for them to be brought to justice as well. Donald Trump has described these riots as domestic terrorism and blamed them on far-left anarchist groups. But there are those who believe, at a potentially pivotal moment in the struggle for racial justice here, that without violence, their voices will not be heard. The president has called on state officials to deploy the National Guard in cities where the violence has grown increasingly out of hand. But such is the extent of the crisis that he's facing growing calls to address the nation from the Oval Office. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
I'm joined now by Hen Woolcott, who's a farmer and an event organiser who's been at the protest in Olympia in Washington State. Thank you very much for joining us. What was the protest like where you are?
Well, yeah, it was in downtown Olympia, and when I arrived there, the police were extremely aggressive. Within the couple minutes of me being there, there was pepper balls and flashbangs and rubber bullets that were being hit at the protesters. And I mean, like, protester isn't even quite like the great way to like encapsulate like how people are showing up right now. I think that rebels and rebellion, I think, are much more accurate terms to describe the mood and actions that people are taking.
We're seeing some footage, actually, that you shot yourself while out on the streets joining those protests. What was it that made you decide to join this protest?
Well, you know, I mean, growing up in the United States, you start to get really you see the pattern that policing happens in this United States, and obviously, I mean, I'm white, and so a lot of that hasn't come down on me personally, but eventually, but I've had enough interactions with the police, like doing political engagements in the past, that I really kind of see the ways and modes in which they operate, and that submission and violence are the only like languages that they speak, and those are the only things that they know how to do. And you know, at the end of the day, I just like refuse and rebel against like this type of system where apparently black, you know, murdering black people is necessary to the functioning of the system. I mean, that's like, if we haven't learned that lesson after the whole history of the United States, then I don't know how many more times we need to learn it. I mean, the United States police force was organized and formalized around catching slaves. And so there's, not a lot has changed.
Donald Trump has described the riots as domestic terrorism. What's your response to the way he's been handling this?
Well, first of all, I think it was just like a day or two ago was the anniversary of Donald Trump's father being arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally. So it's like the apple hasn't fallen very far from the tree. I think that I think Donald Trump is irrelevant right now. I think that the really interesting thing that I've noticed about this political moment is that people don't care what the politicians have to say. People don't care what the mayors have to say. People don't care. They are not waiting any longer for things to change. They're making it happen right now. And I think that when the thing that a lot of people have been starting to focus on is the good protester, the bad protester, the instigator, the looting, the violence. But the thing that people, first of all, my response to that is that the outside agitator, again, this type of rhetoric goes all the way back to when slavery was more prevalent in the U.S. When slave revolts would happen, they would say that it was northern agitators who came to the South and agitated the slaves to rise up because they just couldn't believe that black folks would revolt on their own will. And so it's just continuing this hundreds of years old rhetoric that's extremely racist. And so, people don't care anymore, and they're going to make it happen. And also talking about Minneapolis, the violence and the looting and the destruction that happened, it's not just random. The Target that was looted was when that was built, people were very already frustrated and angry about that. And the condos that were built, to rent those, it's $2,500 American dollars a month to be able to live in those. And so it's the world around us and black folks especially, it's just not being built for people. And so
obviously, sorry to interrupt, but obviously what you're describing there is you see this as a lot of history that is bubbling up and has now come to this point. Do you believe this is going to be a defining moment where things do change?
Yeah, totally. I think that we all thought that COVID is still really present in everything, but everybody thought that, the political era that we're going to live in is the ex-COVID era for the rest of our lives. And now that's up in question. I think that it's possibly a pivotal moment, and it depends on what we do. And if we continue to show up and push for the defunding and disarmament of police, yeah.
So will you continue to protest and defy the curfews?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that we are going to keep on pushing, I think. And again, it's how many waves of this have we had to endure, to see this type of violence playing out over and over and over. And and that's the thing that we need to realize, and maybe people from other parts of the world, is this is our police force reformed. This is after the civil rights era of the 60s. Then there started being black police officers. This is after the extra training. This is after the body cams, and this is what we see. This is what we get. I watched somebody tonight get arrested, and the cops used the same knee in the back of the neck maneuver that killed George Floyd, So and there's just these images of it's almost like it's hard to say really. Yeah. It's almost like a police riot is what's happening. And it's we're defending and responding from our communities, and that's why police precincts are getting burnt down, because we're trying to stop their ability to be able to continue doing their violence.
Hen Wolcott, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.